Welcome to the Cybersecurity Simplified podcast, where we take the mystery out of today's top security threats and solutions. If a thief or vandal breaks into your house by picking the front door lock, they can take or break anything and everything in your home. But what if every room also had a deadbolt lock? Of course, this would contain the damage. In cybersecurity, there's a similar strategy called zero trust microsegmentation. And today's guest, Brian Haugli, cybersecurity expert and CEO of SideChannel, explains how zero trust microsegmentation can reinforce managed detection and response initiatives by enabling tighter access control. And more importantly, by containing the damage from breaches and malware, including insidious ransomware. Don't miss our conversation about this paradigm shift in network security. Well, here we are at the start of the new year, rocking a new episode. Hey, everyone. I'm your co-host, Susanna Song.
I'm co-host David Barton.
And Happy New Year, David.
Same
How
to
are
you.
your holidays?
Not too bad. How about you?
Yeah, it was great. Took a week off. The weather was surprisingly warm at the end of the year. And now we've just gotten hit pretty hard, actually across the U.S. with snow and the polar vortex, but At least we're indoors, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, let's bring in our guest today. No surprise there if you're watching on YouTube. Brian Haugli, welcome to Cybersecurity Simplified.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, Brian, how long have you been in the managed security space?
So probably on this side of things, as long as I've been running SideChannel, so going on 5, almost 6 years, but well over 20 years in the sector, and pretty much focused my entire professional life on cybersecurity and enterprise architecture.
Before the managed security space, tell us about where your career took you and what type of opportunities you were dealing with.
So I'm not shy about kind of what's about me online. So I won't give a full resume rundown, but I've done everything from being the CISO at a Fortune 500 to running major programs inside of the Department of Defense and intelligence community, and being a pen tester. So it's been a great journey. I love this space. I love risk management. I like solving problems, and cyber seems to be a very interesting and consistent problem to have to solve.
Yeah,
well,
that's right.
And that's how Brian and I first met. Brian was a CISO at a Fortune 500, and I was a CISO at a large software company. And I walked into his office one day, and I walked away impressed as well. And we've been connected ever since.
Oh, thanks, David. Yeah, I remember sitting at that table in my office, first meeting you and chatting with you, and I was like, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. And as much as I love this space, I feel like we don't have enough people who actually know what they're doing.
We don't.
Cybersecurity.
No, we don't. Suzanne and I have done an episode on folks and how they get to be CISOs, and you would probably agree to this as well. In this industry for years, we promoted the best network guys we have, and we make them the security guys, and they become directors of IT security, and they just don't understand the problem. They understand a piece of IT, but they don't understand cyber. And so there's a huge need for mentors of coaching those people to become CISOs like you, who see the big picture and see the gamut of the risk and able to bridge the gap between, and this is not even our topic today, Susanna, but bridge the gap between business risk and cyber risk. And that's still a huge gap in the leadership in cyber today. So yeah, I'm with you.
Curious, Brian, how you started SideChannel and why. What was your vision, and what do you guys do today?
Yeah, so we started out as a service company, and really the goal was, how do we bring what we've been able to do as professionals, as CISOs for enterprises, and how do we bring that into the mid-market and startup? Generally a very underserved market space, can't afford a full-time CISO, can't afford the rate that comes with kind of very senior leadership. But the reality is the problem still exists. in mid-market and small business, the same as enterprises. But without the resources, how do you solve for it?
Yeah, I was going to say probably more needed, because the big companies have people like you, have resources.
Exactly.
The small companies are struggling with, just basic blocking and tackling. So it's a huge need, and SideChannel is, positioned to help solve that problem for those mid-market SMB, even mid-enterprise customers who just can't afford the team that Brian has, or folks that are on Brian's team is probably the best way to describe it.
Thanks. Yeah. So the goal was, bringing that enterprise capability, that executive presence down, because every client I walk into, they've made some good technical and tactical decisions about how to secure their environment. They've purchased a good MDR or a good solution, but they don't have a governance structure. They don't have a way to report it. They don't have a way to articulate and kind of carry the narrative about what they are doing to the people who are asking the most. And those are generally regulators, the board, the C-suite, and even customers. So who in your company is doing that? So SideChannel was built to take former enterprise CISOs who want to get into consulting, but don't necessarily want to run their own consulting shop. They come and work for us. They're full-time. We've grown the company to, a good amount. And we're working with clients that are, our largest clients are $6 billion in revenue, some publicly traded, some privately held. Our smallest clients are $20 million backed VC startups. So it's this range and this gamut. And I picked 6 billion because I've kind of figured out that that's about the point. That's the threshold where companies can justify a full-time hire of someone like me. I mean, you look at Hitch Partners and their research, great recruiting firm. Mike Piacente does a phenomenal job with that. They've done some research on this. East Coast, $600,000 to bring me in full-time as a CISO. West Coast, $800,000 to $1 million. I mean, name me a 500 person company that's doing, maybe 100, maybe even 200 million in revenue that can justify that spend on one individual. It's very, very difficult, but they still have the same problems. So we found a lot of success, and now we're the largest virtual CISO provider in North America. And it's been a lot of work, but it's something we very much enjoy. And
that's huge.
We feel like we've got a great niche, and we genuinely all do. You talk to anybody on the team, they love working on what they're doing, because our clients are generally the ones who are like, we need you here, we want you here, versus kind of that enterprise thinking, which is, you have to be here, we have to deal with this. So having customers that are more willing and open to want you to help them solve the problem, it's professionally fulfilling for staff, which is probably why our retention rate on talent is so high. So overall, it's a great company. I very much enjoy doing it. But I'll be honest, 10, 20 years ago, you never would have gotten an answer out of me that would have said, yes, I want to start my own company. Yes, I want to be the CEO. Yes, I feel entrepreneurial. I've always been a practitioner. I've always been great at being part of a team and being an individual contributor or leading teams and organizations. I never had any idea I'd be doing this, but I'm so glad that I did.
Yeah, man, you're going to have to join my other podcast, The Working CEO, because we talk to entrepreneurs like you, and seems like you've got a great story. Our viewers today, wow, you guys are in for a treat, because we've got great advice coming from a VCISO and the CEO of the largest VCISO in North America. Holy cow, I didn't even know that when we booked this episode. So, Brian, you're dealing with multiple verticals, probably different, like you said, different size customers. Is there a strategy when you talk to different business owners about how do they handle their cybersecurity strategy? Where do you start, and how do you go about teaching them defense in depth and prevention, detection, response? What are your recommendations?
Yeah, so if anybody does follow me online, I'm a huge controls nerd. I wrote a book on the NIST cybersecurity framework. I mean, I don't know why, but it was cool to do. But I am that guy who likes frameworks. So having come out of DoD as well, and just, I like playbooks. I like kind of working off of things that I know work. So why recreate the wheel every time? Risk management frameworks are pretty straightforward. You assess a current state. You do a gap analysis against what your target state is. So what do I look like today? What do I look like? What should I look like when I grow up? What's in between is your gap analysis. That should then inform your strategy. And it's amazing how many clients and how many organizations I go to that have never done that and just jump right to technical implementations, capabilities, and tooling. And it's not that tooling or technical capabilities are inaccurate, but is the racking and stacking and the prioritization of what you choose and when to do it, is that right? Did you choose to do the thing that's number 10 on your list first? Why? Because, and a lot of times the answer is, well, that's what we did last time, or I did that at my last job, or that's the shiny thing that looked cool, and that's what the sales guy sold me on. I hear a ton of that as an answer, but is that lacks prioritization, which means you're not actually addressing the risks that are first and foremost. So really it's do you even know what's in your environment? Can you do a risk assessment first? Can that then inform your strategy? And then once you have that, and that doesn't need to be a huge process. I think a lot of people skip that because they believe that this is like some big arduous process to figure out, and it doesn't actually need to be. But then once you create the strategy, please stick to it. Like, see it through. How many times I've talked to folks, they're like, every 6 months or every year, they're recreating like a new strategy. And it's like, did you see the last one through at all? Mm-hmm. Did you complete your objectives? Where are you on that process? So, or worst, hey, we started against one framework. Say we selected NIST. And like halfway through, like, let's also align to this other standard and this other standard. It's like, you didn't see one framework all the way through. You don't know what you look like. And now you're just wasting efforts. So horrible story, but like the gig that I took at that Fortune 500 when I left the DoD, I walked in there and they were like a quarter of the way through 3 cyber frameworks. And they hadn't completed any one of them. And I asked them, I was like, well, how do you look? They're like, well, we're, 25% on ISO. We were starting NIST. And then it was like, you have zero idea of what you look like and what you're supposed to be doing. You're just kind of like flailing around. And that's not a strategy. No. So when the board comes about and says, hey, tell us about your strategy, is you can't point to 3 kind of, excuse my language, half-assed approaches. Right. And like, efforts. You have to show something that you saw something all the way through and you're doing something with those outcomes. And you can take everything I just said and apply it to financial or business strategy. That's not specific to cybersecurity. No. That's how businesses think about executing on strategy. And that I feel is a big differentiator between CISOs who know what they're doing and how to operate cyber at an enterprise level versus CISOs who operate cyber at an IT level. Right. I agree. People ask me a lot, what framework should I pick? And I tell them, I don't even care. Just pick one and violently execute against it, right? Have some outcomes, show some progress against a strategy, and the rest will take care of itself. I'm sure coming out of the DoD, NIST is probably near the top of your list in terms of frameworks that make sense. And I agree. I think NIST is a great place to shoot for, but just pick one, right? Don't pick 3. So I definitely resonate with that story. If anybody could lead this conversation, kind of go, okay, give me some guidance, Brian. If you're in Europe, follow ISO. If you're in the US, pick either NIST or whatever regulation you're held to. Exactly. Use that as the framework, right? You don't look good in orange. You don't want to figure out if you do. You don't like paying fines. So pick the regulation first. If there's no regulation, pick NIST CSF. Exactly. That's it. It's an easy way to just kind of figure out, don't over-engineer it. Don't try to do all of them. Don't make this too difficult. This should be the easiest part of the journey because you want to really reserve your resources and pulling out your hair for when you get into remediation and execution and mitigation, because that's honestly where the real work actually happens, not the building the report and the assessment process. 100%.
And both of you guys can answer this question, but maybe I'll start with Brian here. Where does microsegmentation now fall when you are providing expertise to businesses? Who needs it? Well, why is there such a big push for microsegmentation today? And what are your thoughts on why aren't more businesses adopting that?
Well, so I'll answer the last question first. If you use the traditional methods, it's because they're not doing it because it's hard. It's traditionally been only available through implementation of hardware. Yeah. And now with the proliferation of software-defined networking or SDN, we can now start implementing segmentation through software. But the reality is where does it rack and stack and fit in? If you really boil it down, and look, I know we have a product called Enclave that does this for you, but even if you abstract from that product or any product, all we're talking about is RBAC and access controls.
That's right.
This is a fundamental cybersecurity capability. We've been talking about it since the Rainbow series of books inside the DoD, and since cyber was first called information assurance.
And Brian, just interrupt real quick. For some of our listeners who don't have as much of the vernacular that you and I do, RBAC is role-based access controls. So if you're an administrative assistant, you don't need admin rights to the domain. If you're a network admin, you don't need admin rights to payroll. And so understanding roles and then understanding what access controls are assigned to that role is essential in a security program. Sorry, Brian. Our podcast, right, is all about helping people get into this industry and understand complicated terms. And RBAC is probably one that most people outside of our circles don't spend much time.
No, that's fair. And I got beat over the head by couple of my bosses about using acronyms too much. In the DoD, everyone,
that's all we do.
Fine,
yeah, that's
outside of that, you can't. So apologies, but yeah, so role-based access, right? That's great for users and systems, right? Should David be able to access the finance systems? Not if he's not in a finance role, right?
Exactly.
The other piece is, should this server be able to communicate with that server? Well, does it need to? Are they integrated in some way? Is it the middleware to the front end or the database? Then yes. If not, then no. And when we talk about ransomware and kind of how lateral movement happens, that's because unfortunately, 10, 20 years ago, IT collapsed networking to make it easy to manage, became flat networks, and there's not these walls in between everything. So you can jump from one system to another very easily. So we have the capabilities to be able to implement and segment all of these actually with, Active Directory and VLANs or virtual, segmentation through our hardware. But with the push to remote and kind of the lack of wanting to put the efforts into doing it with those, products have emerged to try to make this easier.
Well, and I think there's a key point here. To your point, Brian, we've been talking about microsegmentation for 20 years, but it was onerous to try to do. Only big companies with lots of money did it, and they only did it in small portions of their business that they truly wanted to protect, because it was very difficult to do. And now with Enclave and there's other products in that space, it's become very easy. It's an agent that does zero trust, right? And Susanna, we talked a little bit about zero trust starting off, but the fundamental principle that I'm not going to give you any access to anything unless you have an explicit requirement to do so is how we start to get ahead of ransomware and how we start to get ahead of lateral movement and how we start to get ahead of insider trading. If Brian has no need to look at the database and drop the whole database table and take that data home with him, why should he have access? And that's the fundamental principle.
These are very basic concepts, but unfortunately now marketing has made them as if they are net new or they are very complex and like next generation. But the reality is, if you look at core IT architecture and core IT engineering, these are the practices that should be implemented when designing and putting forward and creating any type of network. But unfortunately, networks have grown, people have come and gone from those networks. So those were either not created correctly in the beginning or they weren't managed correctly as they grew. And the RBAC, the segmentation and all of that has either never fulfilled or has completely collapsed in especially in growth companies.
Right.
That these things haven't been in place. It's like, oh, well, I have to manage it. I mean, a lot of times you just have to put yourselves in the position of the IT network engineer or the systems admin or whoever's in charge of that system. Is like, you know what? I got 20 tickets in front of me with users who are screaming at me about needing access. They look like that guy. I'm just going to grant them that access. Okay, this new server needs to go up because the business has implemented a new application. We got to get this out, and this is going to be revenue generated. Okay, that system looks like that system. It should have access to that database. Fine, boom, here you go. I'll get back to securing it later.
Right.
And that's how a lot of organizations operate. And it's not, I feel kind of bad saying that, like, well, you shouldn't do that. Well, you shouldn't, but I know why you're doing it.
Right.
And I feel for you. But the reality is, me feeling bad about it and you not doing it and not having time isn't going to save you when lateral movement starts rolling across your network.
Right.
And you look like what happened to Merck, right? They said in the first 5 minutes, like 10,000 systems were compromised. Within 45 minutes or within an hour or 2 hours, all 40,000 systems were compromised. I mean, you want to talk about a wave and a bad day.
Fast. Yeah.
There it
That's
is.
a bad month.
Yeah.
So where would you prioritize this solution in the stack? Do you tell your clients everyone needs this, or is it certain customers? How would you position microsegmentation?
So I try to. Oh, sorry, David. Go ahead.
I was going to answer it first because I'll answer this first, Brian, and you can fill in the gap. And the reason I want to answer first is if this isn't top of the list for folks, then they're missing out. Because if you rewind to what I believe the value prop of an enclave type of product, if I can stop the bad behavior, I don't have to detect it.
Right.
If I can prevent, and Susanna, this goes back to our conversation that we have a lot about prevention versus detection.
Mm-hmm.
If I can prevent and just stop it, I reduce a lot of noise, right? I reduce the things that my operations team have to watch because I've just stopped it. And microsegmentation, zero trust by default is going to stop everything and only allow what I trust. And if I have the visibility, and Brian, we didn't talk about this yet, but what Enclave gives you is, even though it's a trusted person accessing a trusted app that we give explicit rights to, I can still watch it and I can still pay attention to it. And therein lies the benefit in my mind of making this the number one thing in your stack is I stop all the bad by default. I only allow what I trust, and I have the visibility to watch it and then let my detection response program take over. Sorry, Brian, I'm passionate about microsegmentation like you are, and that was my thought.
You'll understand how transparent and honest I am about this space, knowing again that like Enclave is our product. I don't think it's the number one thing you do. I think it's number two or number three, and here's why. When you're looking at the expansion of user accounts and what user accounts can do, MFA to me becomes number one, like no questions asked always. And that's part of a microsegmentation strategy or RBAC strategy. Second, I still believe comes some type of EDR, some type of detection response. And then comes a microsegmentation. And the reason for that is because to be able to roll out an EDR solution to detect and respond to what's going on in an environment is significantly easier, no matter what you ever do, to implementing a microsegmentation. Now, we've made it very easy to do microsegmentation because of how we've developed asset intelligence, vulnerability discovery within the Enclave production. But you still need to know your environment, still need to know this system needs to talk to that system. Those people need to talk to those people. That work still needs to get done. So for me, if I walked into an environment and they're like, we don't have anything, Brian, and we know there's going to be an attack tomorrow, I would say MFA on all your users because I don't have to now worry about those. Yep. Second thing, put EDR on so I can immediately start watching what's about to come in the front door and then start locking down all critical and then secondary and tertiary assets through segmentation. Now, the pendulum has swung in the last couple of years, especially when you look at NIST, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, the 5 families or categories of NIST. Years ago, it was all protection. It was all in the protect category, right? AV and firewalls will save us. That was it. Mm-hmm. And then the EDR solutions came out and made us all believe that is trash. And it kind of is a trashy way to think about things, is that right. That's going to save you. EDR is what you need. Detection is the way to go. And we stopped believing in or doing anything around protection. But the reality is we need to do both. You can't. 100%. The reason that NIST CSF didn't change and become just identify, detect, respond, recover. It encapsulates and has all of them. There's 108 controls that cover those 5 categories for a reason. We're supposed to do both. Right. So if I can implement anything in a stack, it's MFA, EDR, microsegmentation, because I'm trying to lessen the impact and the amount of pain I'm going to go through. And these things give me a level of protection, a level of insight, and then a foundation of segmentation and protection that I can then use to inform back these other areas. And you're right, David. Eventually, once we lock all the doors, our detection will be so incredibly valuable because we know the only things coming through that door are things that I should be seeing. And now we're looking for a lot less noise. And we can feed that information and go, you know what? How did that thing get through?
Right.
I still can detect it. Let me make sure that that's blocked going forward. And detection now informs protection on a go forward basis,
100%.
Indefinitely.
Yep. I'm with you.
Any final thoughts as we wrap today's episode? I always learn something in these episodes, but I like how you were able to position and prioritize, Brian, the most important, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But David, any final thoughts?
I think 15 years ago, there was no easy way to do microsegmentation, zero trust, and even 15 years ago, we didn't have a really ubiquitous deployment of MFA. And I'd probably argue that, Brian, you're right. We got to protect the accounts, especially accounts that matter. I would argue all of them, but the industry has shifted enough, and the pendulum, to Brian's point, has shifted back to center. We still have a huge amount of DR tools out there, detection and response. We're seeing more and more, let's stop the bad thing before it happens. And you've got next gen firewalls, and you've got all of these the EDR part of, there's prevention tools there. But now we've got prevention at the network layer, and that is what we've been missing, I think, in any solid defense in-depth strategy. So if you're thinking about what's next, you've got all your endpoints protected, you've got your accounts protected. Start thinking seriously about, how do I segment my network without hardware, without a ton of effort? Deploying an agent, building a policy. It's very simple, and the outcome is amazing. So I'm a huge fan.
All right. Thank you for those final words, David. And thank you to our guest, Brian Haugli. Thank you to our listeners for joining us. If you have any feedback or questions for David, Brian, or the Overwatch team, please contact us at podcast@highwirenetworks.com or leave a comment. Now, listen, we're not here to sell anything, but I think there were some key points around microsegmentation. Enclave is a solution that Brian and his business offers. Here at Overwatch, we offer a managed OT, IoT security solution. We'll put all the resources and links on our podcast landing page. If you want a demo, if you want a further discussion, Brian, David, or myself, or any of our SEs, we are more than happy to walk you through what seems complicated, right? And so if you need a managed security services provider, we are more than happy to sit down with you and talk with you. Again, this is not a sales pitch. We're here to educate, but again, some of this can be complicated. So make sure you leave a comment or reach out, and be sure to join us for our next episode. This year, we promised to put out some more episodes. I know 2023, we were on the lighter side, but David and I have some great ideas for this coming year, and we are so appreciative of you being part of this journey. So until next time, I'm Susanna Song.
And I'm Dave Barton.
And you're listening to Cybersecurity Simplified.
From all of us here at Overwatch by Highwire Networks, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, rate the episodes you enjoyed, share, and leave us a comment. We'll catch you next time on a Cybersecurity Simplified podcast. Remember, the more you know about cybersecurity, the safer you'll be. To learn more, visit us at highwirenetworks.com/podcasts.